I swear to Almighty God, I never killed any of them.
It was something that had never happened before.
Lincoln police are at the scene of a gruesome flaying.
They were the two most wanted criminals in Nebraska.
Charlie Starkweather and Caril Fugate, they were boyfriend and girlfriend.
They killed 11 people.
They were on the run.
It's the new Bonnie and Clyde. This is the first time somebody who was accused of murder was broadcast on television.
It was just a circus. Charlie Starkweather, he was a celebrity.
This story permeated popular culture.
Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska.
For romance.
Natural-born killers.
They're true existential heroes.
I'm not. I people believe me to be.
Caril said that she's being held hostage.
She's a 14-year-old child. She doesn't know what's going on.
The police started part of the false narrative that Caril was in cahoots with this guy.
Romance, love gone wrong, rape and murder.
Girl and gun, even better.
This is a very different story. This isn't a legend. This isn't romance. This was horror.
I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry it happened.
That was the trailer for the Showtime docu-series, The 12th Victim, and this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. The 12th Victim sheds new light on the infamous 1958 Charlie Starkweather and Caril Ann Fugate murder case, in which the teenage couple was charged and convicted of brutally killing 11 victims at random in a case that gripped a nation. While there is no doubt about Starkweather's culpability, the series re-examines the guilty verdict of Caril Fugate, who was 14 years old at the time of the killings, and questions the media and judicial system's treatment of her despite her self-proclaimed innocence. Using archival and countless film and television series inspired by the killings, award-winning director Nicola Marsh also explores our continued obsession about a case that is more than 65 years old. Join us as we also discuss Nicola's next project, why true crime is so popular, and what it was like to film the new U2 documentary with David Letterman. Stay tuned. Nicola Marsh, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
They're great. I'm envious of your hot drink that I just saw peek into the frame. But aside from that,
there you go. I mean, if you wanted to go grab one, we can always pause. I'm sure you would like to have a good cuppa, but
I mean, I've got my obligatory Los Angeles water because it's so dry here, but I think I'll survive.
How many? That's your day's intake in one go, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just I was fill it up as and then it's through the day I'll take sips.
Okay. Well, thanks again for coming on to the podcast. It's very much appreciated. For our listeners and viewers, just to remind you, Nicola's just we've just released a film docu-series, The 12th Victim. It's on Showtime in I guess since February sometime in North America. Is it anywhere else yet, or is that in the works?
I don't actually know how that works, the international distribution. Okay. We made it knowing it was going to go to the US market, but Showtime is part of a much bigger company, so I'm sure that it will go other places eventually. Okay.
Well, thanks again, and congratulations, and thanks for making this docuseries. I really enjoyed it. I'm keen to talk to you more about it. But for many of our listeners then, a good portion are in the U.S., so they've had a chance to see it, certainly, but many others have not. So maybe start us off, if you don't mind, and tell us what the 12th Victim is all about.
Right. So if you're over 50 in North America, you've probably heard of Charlie Starkweather, but if you're under 50, you probably haven't. But Charlie Starkweather was this young kid in 1958, Nebraska, and he went on a killing rampage. And it coincided with the sort of birth of live television news. Yeah. And so he's on the run and the news is broadcasting it. And he's on the run with his girlfriend at the time. And I think that the whole way the murder spree unfolded was just so unbelievably jarring and shocking and exciting and titillating to America that they couldn't keep their eyes off it. And if you look at the photos of particularly Charles, but also, Caril, when they get captured, not to ruin the surprise, but they get captured.
Yeah.
He's wearing the shirt of this wealthy businessman that he's murdered, but he's been shot by the police and he's got some of his blood is on the shirt. And he's incredibly handsome, and it's black and white photography, and he's just surrounded by like sheriffs and reporters. And it is one of the most eye-catching, dramatic imagery you can possibly imagine. And so after they get captured, he goes to the electric chair, his girlfriend goes to prison. Filmmakers this was just such elixir, their story. And they made the movie Badlands, Terrence Malick's movie Badlands, about them, and then Natural Born Killers and True Romance, and this whole sort of guy, girl, gun, car, cross America genre got spawned basically by these two. And what really intrigued me about the story was, after I did a little bit of research and talked to a couple of people who'd written a few books about it, his girlfriend, who went to prison for 18 years, is like manifestly innocent, like completely innocent. And she's not even his girlfriend, she's his ex-girlfriend, that he's sort of like completely coercing into going with him. And so that is the story that the series attempts to tell, which is really her story. And how in the world did she end up going to prison for 18 years? And how could she be innocent when she'd been alongside him for all these murders?
I mean, I think, and as you said, she's always maintained her innocence, right, from the get-go. And so she was like what is that? It's interesting because what your film shows, your film captures so many things, and you've touched on all of them in your description. But maybe let's focus even on the events a bit, and in terms of what was going on there? Because I think in terms of it's obvious. You said it's obvious she's innocent, but it's also very obvious that he's guilty, right? So, but quickly, people are already making up their minds about her culpability, aren't they? And in terms of, it's a window on where, one thing it's a window where American justice system was at the time, and our views of such events, which were quite jarring, would be jarring now, but were especially jarring then. And how did this? I think you said, but she's only 14. How did this 14-year-old get to be seen as so? And maybe I should a brief stop. If you haven't seen it, spoiler alerts and all that stuff that come with this.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to get some deep spoiler alerts at any second now. But what can you say? Well, go see it, or if you haven't seen it, maybe we'll skirt around this. But it was. Is it fair enough? It was almost a presumed guilty before proven innocent sort of element. Yes. Even when I first started reading about the story, so she comes home from school, and as far as the outside world knows, Charlie's already at her house, and they stay at the house for 5 days. And when they leave, her mum and dad and half-sister are dead. And so it's hard not to imagine how they could have spent 5 days in the house and she wouldn't have been somehow involved. And it's really, so her story though, which sounds a little far-fetched until you really think about the weather and the environment and how old she is. It's like, she comes home from school, she's 14, her boyfriend's 19. She has dumped him the week earlier and he's stormed off fuming and he's got a real temper. And she gets home and she opens the door and he's standing there with a shotgun in her face. And he's like, you better listen to me or I'm going to have your entire family murdered and killed. They're being held hostage by my gang. And she looks around and her family are nowhere around to be seen. And she believes it. what she doesn't know is actually their bodies have already been they've already been murdered, and their bodies are in the outhouse around the back. And I'm like, how did she not know for 5 days? Yeah. But it's the middle of winter, and we didn't put it in because it's slightly unsubstantiated, but she was like, he rolled her up in a carpet every night, or he'd tie her to a chair. Like, she wasn't like just roaming around freely. And she was extremely invested, I think, which is the bigger issue, in this moment of real trauma and dealing with this ex who she can visibly see is in like deep psychosis, in believing that her family is still alive and that somebody's going to get her out of this, and this is not as bad as she thinks it is. Yeah.
And I think, there's that, obviously there's that element, but I think it's also, and I think, I mean, people should go see the film in terms of the details of the sort of the crime element of this, and not giving anything too much away. But it's this happens, and he ends up going on this, as you say, this murder killing spree across Nebraska and into Wyoming. And what you've also have captured is how it's, I mean, and as you say, anyone who's in the sort of 50s or younger, don't even, some of us may not even, I mean, I grew up in the United States. It didn't ring a bell for me. But we can talk more about that later, because what did ring a bell was all those cultural references you mentioned. But I guess what I was going to say is actually, I mean, what was the movie when you were going into this, is that the movie, did you know what you were going to be making? Or was it kind of, as you got further into this, it realized what you had on your hands was this situation of someone who was obviously innocent as you saw it?
As we started making the series, it was based on a book, and the book strongly makes the case for Caril's innocence, written by Linda and Steve. But I guess my sort of just generic habitual skepticism was sort of kicking in as I'm sort of turning the pages, and I'm like, what? Innocent. Like,
So that's, by the way, to interrupt, that's my wife's reaction when we first started watching.
Of course, right?
The 5 days thing. Yeah. How did she not know that kind of stuff,
But I think, there was this tendency to think of people who do bad things as being like extremely Machiavellian and clever and manipulative. So the minute we associate badness, we're like, well, of course they're an arch villain who is like doing all these things.
Right.
And then we also fantasize about what heroes we will be in bad situations. And I think what really I found particularly compelling about the story was that for women, most women, we've all been in slightly sketchy situations. And the path out of it is like laugh at the jokes until you have a clear exit strategy. You don't like, if somebody gets a bit handsy, you don't like turn around and punch them in the face. Otherwise you can end up dead. And I think I just got off shooting as a DP, shooting this show called The Night Stalker, which is Richard Ramirez. Who's that? I'm assuming you're like a true crime aficionado, so you know all the killers.
No, then I should have my wife here, because she's the one that's the true crime aficionado in my house. But I'm more I'm the doc aficionado, but not necessarily true crime specifically. But, yeah.
So Richard Ramirez is this guy in the 80s. He kills like 27 people in LA. It's like unbelievable how many people he killed in really grim ways. But there were several children and women that he assaulted and then let go. And then they were always the ones that didn't fight back. And then there's one woman who, like, while Ramirez was killing her husband, she found the shotgun and pulled it on him, but then the shotgun jammed and she never managed to kill him. And they never found that woman's eyeballs. Like he killed her in I can't remember how many stab wounds there were, but it was in the dozens. And it was pairing that with this was like, if you are with somebody who's in a psychotic state, your only way out is to try and get their heart rate lower and wait until you have a really foolproof exit strategy, because anything less is going to get you killed. And I think it's quite notable that, like, as they're driving across the country, Charlie keeps on sort of asking Caril, like, do you love me? Are you still in love with me? And then even when he's in prison, he's writing to her being like, did you mean all those things you said to me?
Yeah.
Right. And you just imagine the dynamic of that. Like, he still wants her. He wants to be her boyfriend. And he's forcing her to love him, but wants her to not acknowledge that.
Mm. And she's only 14. Right.
Yeah.
So I mean,
and she met him when he was 13. Like, she's really like a young 14.
Yeah. But so there's that element to it, but then there's this element that, as you've already mentioned, but it's gripped, not only just gripped Lincoln, Nebraska, or a state, it gripped the nation, didn't it?
Because they're so cinematic, those two. They get caught, and it's like, wow, he looks like James Dean.
Yeah, he does.
And I think he'd watched Rebel Without a Cause the year before, and like the lead character in Rebel Without a Cause is called Jim Stark, and he's called Charlie Starkweather, and it's this outsider, and like, I'm troubled. You can just see him being like, that's who I am. And so he styles himself like that guy. And then the power of black and white photography is pretty astonishing, because I did see some pictures of him in color, and I was like, oh, he looks a bit podgy, and see his bad skin a bit better, and Yeah.
But I mean, it's just so you've got some amazing archive here, right? So I mean, and that's one of the other things that struck me. But I mean, what you have, it's the early days of television. But she actually goes on the Today Show, right? I mean, its PR is largely in its infancy, I would imagine, or at least that kind of PR. I mean, and
you can feel it. They have no idea what they're doing, and so
my God, yeah,
it's just a disaster. Like, the interview's terrible, and anyway.
And the poor lawyer who's told her to keep her cool. It's a bad analogy, but it's almost like the 1960 debate when they say, Nixon came across looking all, everyone just stopped, lost their, Nixon just came across really bad on camera because they had no appreciation for how you did come across on camera, even then. And she comes off as this cool, maybe even conniving, older than she was.
Even as she grows up, I don't think she does very well on camera.
True.
She's... the place where she does best on camera is those home videos when she's relaxed. Right. But she's a woman, I think, even as a young person, who sort of had her fists up a bit because she come from really tough wrong side of the tracks. And so she emoted a sort of aggressiveness about her that people immediately connected with psychotic murderess or murderer.
Or, and at the time, true, as you point out, I think it's especially in episode 1, this rise of teenage culture and rock and roll, and she's the bad girl. You've already said wrong side of the tracks, but there's something about, automatically this assumption's made about who she is in terms of,
Yeah. And I learned a lot. I think I really got inside the head of the 1950s adult, and understanding that sort of like rock and roll is a bit like what I think of with like fentanyl. People really thought it was going to destroy your life. And in many ways, a lot of the things that nowadays would be like pre-sex marriage or whatever, that would ruin your life. Back then. And so it was just seen as incredibly frightening for adults. And then she and he conformed to that sort of rockabilly look and probably vibe as well. And then they were poor. And so it was hard for people to have compassion for her. Yeah. And really critically for the police, when they went over to that house, 5 times, not 5, 4, 3, during the time when they were cooped up in the house. And she was the one who opened the door. So they're either idiots or she's like ridiculously manipulative.
Mm.
And they weren't going to go for the we're idiots story. So they went for the like, oh, well, she's like a stratospherically manipulative 14-year-old. You've never seen anything the likes of it.
Yeah. And then at the same time, I mean, I don't think I'm giving too much away. There was this other case that they had been really slow to solve that obviously Charlie Starkweather was not just implicated. He killed this fella. And they were, if they had just not been seemingly idiots, then it would have 10 more people would still be alive, right?
Right.
Or would have been alive. And her life wouldn't have been ruined.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they really dropped the ball, but there just weren't any murders around, so I don't think it was even on their radar that
that's fair enough.
It was such an extreme. I mean, there were 2 police officers for the whole city, and so I think at night 2 patrol cars, and so the idea that oh, this could be a big crime that they're unearthing when the 14-year-old is acting a bit weird when she opens the door. They were just like, oh, she's poor and her grandma's hysterical, keeps us sending us over there. And it's annoying. I'm going to go back and deal with our business.
And I think that's another thing, going back to the stuff that you've, the archive, is that, the other thing that amazed me is that, you've got these policemen and the prosecution and everyone just kind of, they're sort of naive themselves. They just answer all the questions that get thrown at them. I mean, you would never
how they killed them. They just tell the news.
Okay,
they're like, oh.
And in these great accents that you don't even really hear anymore, even in the U.S., from the 50s.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that footage and it almost feels like a movie. Like the hats and it feels like you're on sort of Raymond Carver, Chandler, maybe both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so unreally distant, but so close,
Yeah. Or that even while this is all going on, they just, because it's early days, I think as you point out, the local TV station had just gotten their cameras, right? They bring Charlie Starkweather's parents in and just sit them down at a table, and that's what goes for TV, and they just ask him questions about him. It's absolutely amazing, and it's amazing.
And the dad has this sort of astonishing response to were you with the boy or against the boy?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, the first 3 murders, I kind of thought, well, stuff can happen. But by the time he killed the farmer, then I knew that this was not okay anymore. And I was like, oh my. But I mean, he's just genuinely thinking out loud, you know? I mean, he's nervous, but he hasn't prepared anything.
But I guess, and then also further talking to you, then it is no surprise then why this continues to grip a nation, and has certainly for decades now. And for someone my age and younger, we didn't even realize it. I didn't realize all these films it's not even obliquely inspired. I mean, they are directly inspired by this.
Yeah.
This story.
Like True Romance is the same music. The theme music is the same as Badlands, and Badlands is directly about them.
Yeah.
I mean, I think.
Natural Born Killers. I mean, they all went in different directions with this, but it all goes back to this story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we feel. I mean, this is a bit of a psychological stretch, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think love puts a lot of fear into us, love and sex and all those feelings.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we're like, yeah, but could it make you crazy? And could it make you kill a bunch of people? Like, we love the idea of sort of psychotic love.
Yeah.
And this wasn't psychotic love. It was something much more mundane and kind of gross. But I think we have that fascination, which is why it keeps on popping up over and over again, could love be pernicious?
I think that's a very good point. And then I guess there is just this slight subtext that a lot of these films we're talking about were the early 90s. So what was going on then that was causing us to revisit that? But yes, I think it is it's an interesting point that maybe we'll let's give our listeners a quick early break here, and we'll be right back with Nicola Marsh, the director of the Showtime docu-series, The 12th Victim. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Nicola Marsh, the director of the Showtime docu-series, The 12th Victim. We were just talking about what love can do to us, or what we think it might be able to do to us. I mean, what is this partly also the attraction of true crime? You think that's the other thing your docuseries does a very good job of exploring. And I asked that question actually in a fairly recent podcast, and we had to edit it out because the person said they had no idea why people were attracted to true crime, and that was how they made their living. But you've actually gone about and sort of answered that question with your film.
Yeah, I mean, I think true crime is, for a lot of people, is like a mental roller coaster, right? You get to experience all the things you're afraid of, but in a very safe way. It's the same reason we like horror movies. You know, it's like, I want to be frightened, but I don't want to be actually afraid.
Right.
And I think I tried to answer the question about why so many women watch true crime. So that statistic always feels a bit weird for me. I'm like, oh, why are we watching so much of it? But I think women are just much more afraid of rape and murder because we're more likely to be the victims of it. And I think most women, maybe not daily, but like once a month, you'll be walking down a street and think, oh shit. You know, it does cross your mind. Like, I mean, and maybe men think that too, but maybe not in an elevator when the doors close and it's like,
right.
You know, three guys who maybe don't look very friendly. I don't think men are thinking, oh, whoa, this could be a weird situation, but women do have to think like that. And so watching true crime allows us to ride that roller coaster. And you'll notice that most of the true crime series resolve in capture and punishment. Very few true crime series are like, and we never found the guy, and you know, the justice system doesn't work.
Right. Could you get away with trying to make something like that?
I think it would be a real bummer for people. I think people want to know that even when bad things happen, there's retribution and that the world is safe and we catch the guy and we can explain why the guy did the thing. And the closer that the guy looks like somebody you know, the more thrilling the ride is. You know, the more he looks normal, the more he looks like Ted Bundy, the more you're like, ooh, maybe it is that weird neighbor that I've been talking too much to or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really thrilling ride for people. And I think also being able to engage your logic and try and outsmart the series is a big one. Well, that couldn't be true because of this. It's really fun. It allows participation. And I think you're always trying to sort of engage your audience to actually participate and not just be ingesting it passively.
Yeah. I think maybe for some of us guys, we're also just always a bit clueless. I think we're probably not even aware that we sometimes are. I mean, I know it's much more, as you said, for women in that way, but we're probably just not even aware that we're in danger when we actually are, you know. But that's, I
agree.
Yeah. I mean, what's the biggest challenge in covering such an iconic story? Because you've got all this. You've got all this.
Also, there's not as much archival as you think.
Right.
Like some of the archive is a recreation.
Right.
That I shot to look like not the stuff that looks like recre. Like that stuff is like it's color and it's obvious. But there's a lot of the black white footage. I was like, oh, I don't have anything for Charlie getting arrested or Caril getting arrested.
Right.
So I took an 8mm camera and we got a 50s police car and some uniforms and I tried to shoot it really badly. But there's no way that an actual news crew would have been there when Charlie was getting arrested on some random road. But I was like, we don't have anything and I'm not going to animate it.
Yeah.
Because that feels a bit right for the moment.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, and then most of the recordings are recreations because most of the stuff we had was just transcripts. It's just words on a page. And it's a documentary. You can't just like pan down words. Exactly. And so we got actors, we re-recorded it, then we made it incredibly dirty, the audio, so that you'd sort of, even though you were reading the transcript, you would hear it and think, oh, maybe there was a recording in the courtroom, which there never was. But like, just to allow yourself to sort of be in that emotional space and what it must have been like to say these words in a big room and a packed, courtroom, to give you that feeling. But sort of figuring out where the line is between being untrue is important to me. Like, I don't want to represent something that wasn't said or wasn't done, but I also want people to feel what those words must have felt like at the time.
No, and I think you're very upfront. It says the words of, right? And so, well, some people may not put two and two together and realize that means it's probably someone reading them, or acting them. But no, I think and I think it's very powerful. I mean, we do know what Charlie Starkweather sounded like, right? So you had to find someone who could come pretty close, but I guess it's about finding a good Nebraskan or Midwestern accent that someone's able to.
And also the performance.
Yeah.
You can't perform that like, well, I'm a psycho, so I'm going to perform it like a psycho, because psychos don't think they're psychos. So you have to find an actor who's great. I mean, the voice recording, just all of it was amazing. The voice actor and the physical actor were two different people, but they were both extraordinary in terms of really trying to be the person and give compassion to that person from their point of view.
Yeah, and even you've even got with Caril Fugate, you've also got recreation actors for her as well.
Interrogation.
Yeah, and the way you film it is great too, because it's not because it would have been too tempting to say, well, that doesn't look like her, right? I mean, so it's.
There's much more footage of her, so I showed less of her, whereas the Charlie actor, the match was really good.
Yeah, true.
But, she was also 14, so finding an actor who could actually act, who wasn't, I'm not going to put a 14-year-old in that position to say those words and live those things. Yeah. And so it was just a much harder get, but Ivy, the actor who played her, she was just great. They were all so great. It's the bounty of living in Los Angeles.
Yeah. And I think that as you pointed out too, it kind of gets back to this, all the narrative, the Badlands and all the others films that have been made. As you said, you're not going to put a 14-year-old in there. Well, often they have made her character much older, haven't they?
Right.
She's at least 19 or older. Even if she's not literally playing it certainly appears as an older.
Yeah, we talked to the screenwriter who wrote the movie Starkweather, and that's the stuff that, like, in the shower and she's opening the door and she's kind of biting her lip and stuff. And a lot of that was based on sales. Like, they had to cast an actor who was a bit of a name in order to get the money and blah, blah, blah. So there you are. It's capitalism.
Yeah, well, so when you were tackling this, was this your idea? Were you, and what was the unique, I guess, did you know from the beginning that unique angle that you were going to be bringing to the story was Caril's story?
Yes, because it was based on the book. And so that was, that book is very sort of, from the outset, very pro Caril. And I felt it was really important to first think Caril was guilty before you found her innocent. So that you can experience what the police felt, what Nebraskans felt like, that it was very, very easy to see her as guilty, rather than being like, aren't these people in the 1950s misogynistic idiots? Because they weren't.
No. And you just brought up a good point. I guess you did go back to Nebraska and did some filming there.
You did, yeah.
Yeah, how is that? Is it still palpable, the feeling?
Yes.
Is it?
There's nobody in Nebraska who doesn't know about this, especially, but nobody. They all know about it. And, they still get sort of like tourists coming to see Charlie's grave. And I mean, there's not a lot of reasons that the national press, any reasons the national press was coming to Lincoln, Nebraska. So when it happened in 1958, it was astonishing that like the entire of the United States and some of the world's press corps were suddenly in Lincoln, Nebraska. And then all that footage got beamed all over the world. And so they got on the map, as it were, but for the wrong reasons. And I think they smart a bit about that. And I think for any Nebraskan that went through it, it was like 9/11. Like, it was like nobody forgets what it was like those 2 days when they couldn't find them.
Right. And they were literally under lockdown.
Yeah, like people were moving their dresses and putting them in front of the door, and everybody had their guns out. Like, I mean, nobody had ever dealt with. And also, Charlie's killing people seemingly at random in random places. So it doesn't feel like you can be like, oh, well, it won't be me because.
It's an interesting point. I mean, it's not the subject of the film, and not even something we need to, I guess, really concern ourselves with. But any idea why he did this?
I mean, I do think I have some idea. So he's impotent, right? He's 18, 19. He has a pretty strong learning disability and a stutter, and he's starting to lose his eyesight to what would have been quite catastrophic levels in a year or two.
Oh, really? Did he have a condition of some sort? Yeah.
And he had two really extreme, I'll just call them concussions. Once as a little child, and then once as I think he was like 15. Okay. And the second concussion had given him a really bad headaches thereon after for a long period of time. Yeah. Like, I think into his death.
Yeah.
And so he's like an incredibly sexually frustrated 19-year-old with maybe some sort of brain injury and a learning disability. And he's really angry. His life is almost over, and he's 19, and he's like thrashing around looking for a lifeline. And that lifeline, the only thing left and available for him is destruction. Like everybody wants to be noticed. Even if good affirmation is not available, we'll go for bad affirmation, because just being ignored is just about the worst thing for a human being.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fairness, you do touch on that in the first episode as well. I think was it one of the? Do you have a psychologist who even talks about?
Yeah, I mean the murder of the women is
it's horrific.
It's really grotesque and really sexually infused.
Yeah.
And I think that tells you something about why he's killing people. And I think a couple of the others may have been sexually fused, but the Ward murders, they were such a powerful, celebrated family that there really wasn't a lot of information that we could find about those murders anyway, because I think out of respect, it really was not disclosed.
Yeah. And, but yeah, with the Wards, you have the granddaughter on camera.
Liza, I love her. She's fantastic. She's really good. And I think, she'd inherited a lot of trauma from her father. So for your audience, her father was 14. He was at boarding school, and he comes back home, and both his parents have been murdered in really brutal ways. And he makes the decision to not talk about it and not think about it and move somewhere else. And interestingly enough, as an adult, he deals in antiquities, and is such a symbol for like trying to freeze time and not wanting to let go of things, I think. And Liza is like digging around trying to unearth all the bones, much to, I think, probably her father's chagrin, or at least to his pain. But I think she's trying to get oxygen on the whole thing. And it's become part of her life's work to do that, to sort of exorcise these demons that have really chased her whole family around. Like it's the trauma of that is, and especially back then in those days, nobody was like giving a 14-year-old therapy or like, let's talk about it. Yeah.
And what do you, I think it's, actually hard to believe we're starting to come to the end of our time together, Nicola. But what do you hope
great interviewer, so I could talk to you all day.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you.
True.
I mean, what do you hope this... we'll talk a little longer then. Flattery will get you everywhere. But what do you hope this series' legacy will be?
I mean, like, for Caril, I think it would be great if she could get a pardon. I think she's innocent. She's kept her story the whole time. And even if she isn't innocent, which I do think she is, she was 14 at the time and she was tried as an adult, which is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And she didn't actually kill anybody. Like, even on the worst case scenario, nobody said, oh, well, she stabbed people and killed people. I mean, Charlie tries to suggest it, but it's just so obviously transparently just bullshit. Right. Nobody even believes him. But I think it would be nice for her to get a formal pardon, because I think she's tried so hard for so many years to not be the villain. And I think she realizes when she gets out of prison and she's 30, that she's going to go down in the Wikipedia page as this horrible murderer. And she's like, but that's not what happened. And also I'm accused of murdering my family members, people I still miss. And so she's really tried to clear her name. And I think it'd be nice if more than just a few people, but actually like some institution was able to say, we believe you. And I think generally, as a series as a whole, I think I'd love it if it could just shed a little bit of light on maybe how people behave in abusive situations. They don't necessarily act in sort of dramatic and sort of physically aggressive ways that we tend to sort of take things very slowly. And I think that is often confused by both the aggressor and law enforcement as sort of, oh, you're into it.
Right. Or you're at least, you're an accomplice of, you're complicit in some way.
Yeah.
No, I think that's, I mean, I guess, and she's not, I mean, not to give too much away, but she's not really I mean, that's the other story, is that this, in fact, more so than the crimes themselves. I mean, the lengths that she's gone to and has continued to go to prove her innocence is, I mean, I'm sure there are others, we know there are others sort of in similar situations who've probably have just gone off and tried to live their lives quietly somewhere. But she is very adamant and has gone to all kinds of lengths to clear her name.
I think particularly because it was her family members that she stands accused of killing. I think she couldn't live with that narrative. And then I think also because the story was so famous, it didn't matter where she went in America. People were like, oh, you're Caril Fugate? I know who you are. And like, you know, she gets released from prison. She takes a job in a hospital, and like, there are people who won't ride in the elevator with her. And, you know, she just couldn't get away from it. And so she's like, well, if you can't get away from it, I'm going to have to fight back. And I think she's not somebody who's seeking fame at all. So I think it's quite difficult for her to do it.
Yet she's been in the public eye since she was 14. So that must be such a difficult life she's had to lead. You know, been on national TV back when no one went on national TV. And ever since, you know, she's on, as you say, because the story keeps popping up. She's there. She keeps, you know, it doesn't go away for her.
Yeah, and I don't think that you can lose your parents in that style and get over it. Because I think, you know, she runs to the police and the first thing she says is, can I see my parents?
Right.
And, you know, the police sort of fob her off for like a couple of days. And finally they're like, don't you know, girl, they're dead. And that's how she finds out her parents are dead. And nobody can come and visit her in prison because her parents are not around anymore. And the next time she sees her ex-boyfriend, now knowing that he had not only killed her parents, but lied about killing her parents, is at a trial where he's trying to put her in prison and does it successfully, wins.
Yeah.
And it's like somebody like making you a nice dinner and then telling you afterwards you just ate your pet. You know what I mean? The horror of like what she'd been through and being his, you know, accomplice, to think she was saving her parents, because he kept on saying, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to get your parents killed. And then find out that was all a lie. It just the mind fuck of that. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your show.
Oh, we've said far worse on this show, so don't worry.
Okay, good. So just keep it out. But I don't think, and when that happens at 14, I don't think you ever get over that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. What's next for you in terms of?
When's your show coming out? Because then I can figure out if I'm allowed to tell you or not.
Well, this will probably be released next week, but
after Monday.
Yes, it would be after Monday.
Well, so I think I'm doing a documentary with Demi Lovato about child stardom.
Oh, wow.
So completely different. I mean, I've done a lot of music stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, I'm really interested in that idea of identity and how your identity gets formed in your teen years and what happens if you intersect with capitalism in those years.
Interesting. Well, we'll look forward to it. If we haven't scared you off, then we'd love to have you
back on. No, you're definitely not scared me off. I mean, it will be a year or so. So
we'll put it in our diary, and hopefully we'll. And also, we probably should always have a segment on here that's called "How Accurate Is Your IMDb Profile?" But is it true that you are DP on this Bono, The Edge, and David Letterman doc that's coming out? I've seen previews.
I just saw those guys last night because we had a screening. Bono was there, and Edge and Letterman in LA. And we showed it to a bunch of Disney people.
Amazing.
And Morgan Neville, who's the director, who's
right.
He's a prolific and very...
Well, he was exec on this, on 12th Victim, right? Yeah.
We've been working together for almost a couple of decades. And he was like, do you want to come to Ireland and film you two in a concert for 300 people? And I was like, yeah. Yeah, I do. And it ended up being just a real pleasure. And, you know, I wasn't a big U2 fan, but those guys are really lovely, like really, really lovely, smart, cool, thoughtful people.
And I mean, the thing that struck me, I don't know why, but I was like, and then David Letterman, how does he,
I know.
How does this all fit together? But I guess
Hollywood, watch the movie and then we'll talk again.
Okay.
I mean, they're friends, so that's it's quite sweet actually. But yeah, I mean.
Well, excellent. Well, I think again, do check that out because it looks. And again, that's black and white, isn't it? Or a lot of it is.
No,
or is
the U2 thing is mostly color, but
okay.
But a lot of U2's work is in black and white. But what we shot was in color.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you again for coming on. It was a pleasure meeting you, Nicola. Just remind our listeners and viewers we've been talking with Nicola Marsh, the director of the Showtime docu-series, The 12th Victim. All 4 episodes are available now, I've been told. So do check it out if you have access to Showtime. I won't say how you should or should not have access, but give it a try. And thanks again, Nicola. Good luck with everything and with your that next project, which sounds really interesting. And thanks again. I also would like to thank those who helped make this podcast possible. A big shout out to Sam and Joe at Intersound Audio in York, England. A big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. Many of you have been with us for 4 incredible seasons. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. Please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk. showtime.uk.